what's up? Dave with Brazos Valley Strength. Today I wanted to take a quick look at ascending sets, which is something that I think has been popularized a whole lot more recently. If you follow most of the good lifters on social media, you'll see a lot of times that people are mentioning that they're doing ascending volume or ascending sets in general. But I think this is something that almost every lifter is familiar with to some degree from the earliest stages of training. And I think most of the time they're called pyramid sets or something like that. But I think there are some distinct differences in what the expectation is with ascending sets versus pyramid sets. So pyramid sets would be something like a set of 5, a set of 3, a set of 1, but let's say they're all at a 8 RPE or maybe even totally near failure. Ascending sets, generally speaking, will be the same rep range, maybe 5s the whole way, but with ascending intensity. So I may start with a 6 RPE and then a 7 RPE and an 8 RPE. But most of the time, the main objective with the ascending sets is that we're kind of biasing towards that top set quality and top set load in general. So what I wanted to look at would be some of the reasons why we would choose ascending sets over straight sets or just some other options in general, drop sets, whatever. So I think there are some distinct advantages of doing ascending sets, and I'll talk about mostly the way that I'm programming these. So if you're following along with my programming or you're an athlete of mine, whatever, these certainly will be something that will help you apply these concepts into your programs. Or if you're a coach, maybe these will be new tools for your toolbox. So I do think ascending sets do have some distinct advantages over straight sets or top set with back downs for certain qualities that a lifter may have. And one of the first qualities that I think can be addressed through ascending sets is a lifter's propensity to overshoot too often. It comes from number hunting, things like that. But if you give them a single and then back down sets, very, very often lifters feel like that single really matters what the load is. And so they're chasing after a specific load or increased performance or things like that really often. And they're not really thinking about technique as something that we're trying to improve a lot of times. They're not thinking about the total work of the day as something that matters. And a lot of times lifters get purely focused on that one single as the total workout, as the metric of all progress. And I think ascending sets give us an opportunity to help regulate this. So let's say we'll use the 5s for the example. With ascending sets of 5, I may put a load cap or an RPE cap at a 7 RPE at the top end. And so we start off with a 4 RPE, a 5 RPE, 6 RPE, and we're getting a bit heavier as we go. A lot of times this gives lifters a very honest idea of how strong they are in the day and can reduce that propensity for the lifter to overshoot more often or just their tendency to just want to go too hard. I think as a coach, it also gives me a lot more insight as to how their loads are moving across different spectrums. If it's supposed to be a 7 RPE at the top and they send me a 4 RPE and a 5 RPE, and they're looking very hard, I think I can have a much stronger argument with this lifter that it's just not accomplishing the goal of the day of being a bit lighter and allowing us to work on technique. Which technique is one of the strongest areas that ascending sets give us an opportunity to go after. I think it just really improves the quality of the session in general. So by starting a bit lighter, especially with variations, we can get the lifter to have a lot better connection to the feeling of the technique that we're trying to accomplish, which variations tend to fit ascending sets very well. So if I'm doing pause squats with a lifter because I think it'll help their balance or just slow them down and get them in a better rhythm, then ascending sets can be a very strong option for this as we start them with something that is very much submaximal and increase load a little bit over time, and then or throughout the session. And then by the end of the session, they have much better quality than if we were to just start off with a hard set of 5 and then do back down sets from there. And to that example, on top of the ascending sets, I think that there are many ways after that top set that we can program the rest of the session. So one of the most common ways with me is I'll work up to a top set. So we'll use the 5s, ascending up to a set of 5 at an 8 RPE. And then from there, I can do drop sets, a percentage-based drop set, RPE-based drop set, whatever. But at this point, lifters have a pretty good connection to the way that we're looking for them to move and the way that they're moving on that day in general. And so we've increased the quality of the session overall, given an opportunity to prioritize the top end a little bit and go after, have some aggression with the numbers there. But from there, after having that spectrum of loads, we're able to drop back down and still have a quality session. But we've built up some volume on both sides of that top set, instead of just having the top set that may be high emotional load, high physical load, and then dropping down from there. And if we were to match the same sets, so for my example with the 5s again, if I do 2 sets ascending up to the top set and then 1 or 2 back downs, we still end up with 5 sets versus 1 top set of 5 and then 4 back down sets that a lot of times end up being very, very mentally taxing for a lifter. And that's one of my strongest cases for ascending sets being better than just straight sets, is the mental engagement that we get from ascending sets. So if we're working up to a top set, I think that process feels a bit easier than if we're just hitting repetitive sets at a certain load and then dropping that back down. If the total volume of that session is exactly the same, but we get more mental engagement, I think almost all the time this will lead to a significantly better session, significantly better response throughout a block, enjoyment of training, and much better progress overall. So how do we apply these practically? Just beyond the concept of ascending sets allowing us some opportunities for improved quality, mental engagement, those kind of things, I do think that we can look at how specifically to apply these. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that lifters make is just not really having a good idea of what their progression should be from set to set. Generally speaking, the mistake that lifters make for the most part is actually having the sets bunched too close together. So if you're working up to a set of 5 with, doesn't matter, 300 pounds, the loads may be 280, 290, 300. And that gap may be a bit too close, that all the sets end up being a bit too hard. The top set doesn't feel quite as good because the sets before it were a bit harder. We don't have those sets that are light enough at the beginning to be able to get in a groove with the technique, and the whole day just kind of ends up being more like straight sets than it is the ascending set concept. But less commonly, but still certainly there, is the idea where lifters may take humongous gaps, 200 pounds, 250 pounds, 300 pounds, and call that ascending sets. But that is way too far off base. We don't, at the bottom end, obviously, we're not getting that same challenge for our quality with the lighter loads, or in that case, way too light, to really be able to get us a good feeling of what we need to do on those heavier sets. So generally speaking, my recommendation is about 3 to 5% increase in jumps. And I have that range because obviously one of the biggest things that ascending sets will give us is an opportunity to feel out our ability, our RPEs, our readiness for any given day. So if I have a planned load that I'm starting for at a certain week, 250 pounds, and from there, I'm planning on increasing by 5% up to 290 pounds. I just guessed, don't check my math. But from there, if I do my first set at 250 pounds, and I don't really feel that good, I have a range in which I can progress. So I can go with the smaller end. I can take that 3% jump and then another 3% jump or whatever. Stop before I even get to the top end RPE if I'm already there. But it allows us the opportunity to regulate based on that day, but still have parameters as far as our expectations with how big those gaps should be. Now, secondary to that is I do think that weekly, the progressions will probably matter. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is expecting the bottom end of their progression to go up very, very quickly. So my suggestion for the most part, how I implement these things, is use a bi-weekly tiered progression if I'm following this, if my progression is working out correctly. So what I mean by that, and I'll use my example of my pin squats from this block, is I started off with, I think it was 220 kilos or something like that on my first week for my lowest of my assigned ascending sets. And from there, took small jumps, 10 kilo jumps up to my top set. From the next week, my plan would just be to make that percentage jump from my initial set a little bit bigger. And if I'm able to accomplish it, let's say closer to that 5% goal, I still start with 220 kilos, and I take a 2.5 or a 5 kilo bigger jump than I did the week before, and then I end up a bit higher. If that runs smoothly and I still feel like I have a progression from that week to the next week, then the next week I'll start a little bit higher. It may again be 3 or 5%. And so starting a little bit higher can allow us to push up a little bit more. But most of the time, I think what ends up happening is that we're able to take a little bit bigger jumps. The next week we start a bit higher. And a lot of times we end up repeating very similar loads to what we did in the week before. But overall, the intensity is just skewed a bit higher. My lower end's a bit higher, top end may be pretty similar, but improved total output overall. I think that's one of the big mistakes that people make, is just expecting it to be 10 kilo jumps every single week. And then all of a sudden by week 3 or week 4 of a program, the lightest area, the lightest loads are just significantly too heavy. And again, we miss what we were looking for in the first place. So I think it's very important to define what the goal is for the day. Most of the time, whenever I'm writing ascending sets, I'm writing them as a secondary day. It may be our variation squat day. And on that day, quality far outweighs the total intensity that we're really going for. If we're using pause squats or tempo squats, or in my case, these pen squats, the objective is that I'm trying to accomplish a certain feel from the movement and increase my total quality in that movement. And that is certainly going to be messed up with the program design if all I'm going after is weekly increases. Where in my program currently, at the end of the week is my hardest squat day. And I'm trusting at this point that the quality improvements that I'm gaining from doing my pin squats are applying to my overall squat quality. And I'm going into those sessions with much more an objective of just performing at a very high level. But I balance those two things. On the pin squat days, quality is a much higher parameter for what I'm really judging the session by. At the end of the week, load is really my prime example. Now, that may actually be flipped a lot of times with some lifters. I think the most common way that I use ascending sets is to keep lifters from going too hard too often and to give them opportunities to move a bit better. But I think ascending sets can also be a very good tactic for getting lifters to go a bit heavier when they're struggling to get themselves to really go to that place. Mostly this means newer lifters, where a lot of times they may hit a single and it may feel like it's very, very hard to them, but I look at it and I think they had significantly more. This may be an opportunity for us to use ascending sets and to help them kind of understand that they have more in the tank than they really thought they did. And so by, let's say, triples in this case, if it's like a primary heavy squat day, I may start with a RPE 6 and then work them up to an RPE 8. And by doing some of those lower rep ranges, a bit more intensity, lifters can gain a lot of confidence instead of just hitting a single or getting beaten down by just volume overall. So it is important to define what our expectation is from that given day. And if it's quality, sell out on quality, make them really good. Don't worry so much about load and allow those technical changes, technical improvements to really manifest themselves when we care more on our primary sessions, on the heavier sessions, on the things that we're more interested in the load on. So with that being said, I do think that one of the common mistakes when I really say quality, quality, quality technique is that lifters may put too much emphasis just on technique. As I said in my momentum video, is that even when we're focusing on technique, your intent to move the weight quickly and aggressively matters. You should still be trying to progress from week to week, just with a higher standard of what you really want your movement to look like. But if you're not going in expecting to progress, if you're not going in with a plan to move with full aggression and to try very hard, then it's probably not going to work. But I spent a good portion talking about what weekly progressions might look like. I do think that that's something that every day you should try to encourage with yourself. You should try to be excited and go in and look for progressions. But with this strategy, most of the time we're looking for the improvements to come from total quality of the session rather than just investing a whole lot at the top end. So anyway, if this video was helpful, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.